New reporting from the New York Times today shows that during the first few years of the Biden administration, the United States saw its largest immigration surge ever, adding an average of 2.4 million migrants per year and surpassing the immigration boom of the late 1800s and early 1900s. Several factors contributed to this, including political chaos in places like Haiti, Venezuela, and Ukraine, and, according to the Times, the immigration policies President Biden kept in place until his border crackdown this past June. Immigration became one of the Democrats' biggest liabilities in the 2024 presidential election, and Roger Karma argues in The Atlantic that the party should learn a lesson from this. He writes, "For more than a decade, Democrats have struck an implicit electoral bargain. Even if liberal immigration stances alienated some working-class white voters, those policies were essential to holding together the party's multiracial coalition. That bargain now appears to have been based on a false understanding of the motivations of Latino voters." Karma calls that misunderstanding a mistake that in hindsight appears simple, conflating the views of the highly educated progressive Latinos who run and staff immigration advocacy organizations and who care passionately about immigration policy reform with the views of Latino voters who overwhelmingly do not. Joining me now is Jelani Cobb, the Dean of the Columbia Journalism School and staff writer for The New Yorker. Dean Cobb, Jelani, it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
I want to know how you're thinking about this and processing this, right? Like, there's a lot of ashes to sort through, but this notion that Democrats have effectively been ill-advised by the elite institutions that serve them.
Yeah, and, you would include news media in there as well.
Yeah, of course.
Because, we have tended to report and cover communities as if they are monolithic. So the dynamic here that, it's certainly for people who are reporting about this, you always know to some degree or another that there's some disparity between, what the consultant class wants, particularly, and what activists want, and what the kind of rank and file voter may want. And that goes across communities. The same sort of thing happened. We were looking, 4 years ago about where African Americans were on police reform or things like defund the police. Like, those attitudes were way more varied than people suspected. We also saw in this last election that the views of women on reproductive rights were complicated.
Yes.
And even if people really firmly believe in one issue, they're making a kind of counterbalance kind of argument. Do I care about this? Sure, but am I going to vote on this issue this particular time? Maybe not. And so the only thing that I'd say in kind of response to that is that this may not be an either or. There are people who care, strongly about immigration, but who are going to vote on the economy. And, it always becomes a little bit more of a kind of give and take when you're in the circumstances of what people are going to do when they go into that voting booth.
I think what sort of shocks the conscience is the way in which Trump talked about migrants.
Sure.
I think we have a little bit of a sort of compilation of some of his choice remarks. Let's take a listen to that to refresh ourselves.
They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. They poison.
Now a murderer, I believe this, it's in their genes. And we got a lot of bad genes in our country right now.
I don't know if you call them people. In some cases, they're not people, in my opinion. These are animals, okay?
I mean, that is some of the most virulent rhetoric that I can imagine directing at any group of people. And it's not. So, yes, the economy is an important thing, but to also sanction that kind of language seems like a different thing entirely. And I'll recall one of the lessons I learned from Paula Ramos, who's done some great reporting on this, about Latinos and the identity question, right? Here's what she writes. Many Latinos have fallen into the traps of white supremacy, diligently conforming, unknowingly or not, to a system that doesn't just discriminate against them, but also sees them as threats to the preservation of whiteness. Like white Americans, these Latinos now perceive that they have something to lose if immigration isn't more aggressively regulated. But unlike white Americans, they also have something to prove, their own belonging in America.
Sure. And I would add to this, there is another dynamic from which Donald Trump has politically been an enormous beneficiary. As a matter of fact, it may be an incalculable, benefit to him, which is that all of the rhetoric, the thing that sets off alarm bells in the ears of lots of progressives, even lots of mainline liberals, there is an effect on the right where people can say, he's not talking about me.
Exactly.
And there are people on the left going, oh, yes, he most certainly is talking about you. You may not recognize it or not. And other people on the other side saying, well, he's talking about people who came here, quote unquote, the wrong way.
Yes.
Or he's talking about even, the kind of totalizing category of Latino is difficult because you have to disaggregate that to get a wide array of different opinions. So people may say he's talking about Latinos from this particular place, but not this place. And so that rhetoric, it should be alarming to anyone.
Yeah.
But the fact is that if people are able to make enough psychological distance between what he's saying and their own sense of their personal well-being, that gives them the space to still adhere to being a supporter of him.
I don't think I'm being Pollyanna, maybe overly optimistic that Trump's plans, optimism is the wrong word to use, but I still believe that the American project is strong enough that when people see, as NBC is reporting, that Trump plans to scrap the policy restricting ICE agents from conducting arrests in churches, schools, and hospitals. I still believe in this country enough to think that that is not something a vast majority of the public will accept as just the way to keep the border safe. I don't know. I mean, arresting people at church and in school and hospitals?
I at one point thought that people wouldn't tolerate children being separated from their parents at the border. And a lot of people didn't, but there were a whole lot of people who were reconcile themselves to it. The one thing I will say about this is on the church score, it is really difficult to imagine people being dragged out of pews while praying, with people being able to reconcile themselves with that. We've seen a lot that we didn't expect people to go for. That may actually be a bridge too far. The other thing about it is that these rules were in place for practical, pragmatic reasons, not because of their kind of liberal, Pollyanna-ish, kind of sensitivities, but because you really don't want to arrest people at hospitals, because you don't want people with communicable diseases afraid to go get treatment, and you don't want to arrest people, at schools because you want them to actually go to school.
Correct.
And so there's that part of it too.
I feel like we're going to be asking the question, is it a bridge too far, a lot in the coming weeks and months. Jelani, thank you for helping me make sense of this. It's complicated, right? It's difficult. It's fraught. It's great to have you here.
Thanks.